Good morning and welcome to the Ministry of Education press conference for today. Today we'll be talking about the public launch of the Education Bill public consultation period. And with me today I have the Honourable Minister of Education, Ms. Tara Rivers, and I also have Councillor Winston Connolly, the Councillor of Education in the Ministry. Mr. Connolly is joining us for a brief moment. Unfortunately, he has another event to attend and so is unfortunately not going to be able to be with us for the whole press conference. But today we're talking about the public consultation period of the Education Bill. And the purpose of the briefing is to provide some background on why new education legislation is necessary at this time, the process that has been undertaken to produce the bill and supporting legislation, and the key features of the bill and their implications for education. I'd now like to invite Mr. Connolly to give his remarks, and following that, Minister Rivers will give hers.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. As the Acting Chief Officer said, the Education Bill 2015 will be debated in the next session of the Legislative Assembly. And we have a view to pass it into law and commence it immediately after there. The current law has been operating in the Cayman Islands since 1983 with a few tweaks. So we thought that it was high time that this legislation that's effectively 30 years old was revised, really to meet the changes that have occurred in education over the years and the needs of society. We have a number of deficiencies that were identified in our reviews of the laws that were either drafted and put on a shelf, and the existing law itself. And currently, just the lawyer and the minister and I, we saw some technical breaches of the law in place, and that's something that we wanted to correct. I think that the public will agree with us that this review was overdue, and we needed to cure those breaches, and also to bring it in line with the Bill of Rights in the Cayman Islands Constitution Order 2009 and other existing obligations that we have under international human rights. I think that people will ask why this version, because it is based on the Education Modernization Law that was put in place, or attempted to be put in place in May 2009 by the previous PPM government. We looked at all the versions out there, and this version was more in line with the kind of modern viewpoint. It contemplated some of the changes that had occurred over the years in education, and so we felt that it was the draft that had the least amount of work to do, or we would have had to start from scratch. So, and it was also the draft that was given broad consensus in the Legislative Assembly in May 2009. So some of the players have already seen the majority of it. They've accepted it, so that was a safe place to start. When we look at this law, and the minister asked me to undertake a revisiting the legislation in order to, have a comprehensive and robust legislative framework. When we look at this law, the whole goal is to develop Cayman into a center of excellence in education. And we think that this gets us a long way in doing this. It provides the framework that allows us and allows the minister to, really push education to the forefront and to cover the needs of all the children in the education arena. And so I'm very happy to say that I think, that the team, some of whom are in the room today, have done a really good job, and I think we've achieved our mission that has been set by the minister. It's also another example of this government's commitment to take the legislation forward that needs to be brought forward. Sometimes things that have been put on shelves for years, we're not afraid to tackle them. So just in terms of a brief history lesson, I guess, is the best thing to call it. The work that we've done since 2013 was a comprehensive review of what existed. It looked at where we are today and to cure those breaches that I spoke about. And it also provides for future growth and anticipates future growth and changes in our education legislation framework, and also the reality of our schools and where we're trying to get with them. So I thank you for your attention, and I'll now pass it over to the Minister to present some of the key features of the law and the implications for education in this new draft bill.
Thank you very much, Councillor Connolly, and good morning, everyone, and thank you all for being here to hear about the exciting new draft bill for education in the Cayman Islands, and also thank you to the listening and viewing public for being here as well. And so before I start, I want to publicly thank Councillor Connolly, and I want to publicly thank the hardworking team in the Ministry of Education that really worked tirelessly to get us to this point. I think, as Councillor Connolly said, I mean, obviously it's a bill for public consultation. We will be talking more about what that will entail a little later on this morning. But we feel that having started with the Education Modernization Law as the base and building upon that and strengthening those areas where there might have been some ambiguities or weaknesses and building in some of the key priorities of this coalition government was a good place to start, because, as Councillor said, this had already had extensive public consultation not too long ago, and it does reflect the fact that there are some modern practices and changes in education that was badly needed with respect to our legislative framework. So again, I think it's a great opportunity to highlight the effective partnership that we have, personally in terms of working together in this ministry, but also the support that we have from the members of the ministry and the team in the ministry. So again, I just want to say thank you all to who has played a part in getting us to this point. Many of you would have listened or would have heard that, in my budget debate recently, I spoke about the overarching goals for education. And again, I just want to reiterate what those are. And they are namely to establish the Cayman Islands as a center of educational excellence and to prepare students to take advantage of the employment and opportunity and entrepreneurial opportunities that exist in order to be able to excel in the local economy and to compete in the global economy. And those are two really fundamental goals that certainly myself and Councillor Connolly campaigned on, and which are reflected in the independent members' National Priorities Plan, but also captures the goals and essence of the government as a whole with respect to where we want to take education, where we want education in the country to be. And so the vision that is enshrined in those goals really acted as the guide in the development of the Education Bill 2015. And so in order to be able to achieve those goals, it was essential that we create a legislative framework that supports the movement of education in that direction. And in just to draw to your attention, in the 2010 McKinsey and Company's report, How the World's Most Improved School Systems Keep Getting Better, and in many instances that particular report can be seen as a benchmark review analyzing education systems around the world, including Singapore, Hong Kong, Canada, Germany, and England, to name a few. That report specifically outlines a number of key initiatives and interventions that were needed in order for these systems to move from poor to fair, fair to good, good to great, great to excellent. And so we are making sure that our push and our vision aligned with what was international best practice. It was important from our perspective as well, because as I said, we compete globally right here in the Cayman Islands, so we need to make sure that our education system reflects the global best practices as well. And one of the things that report in particular highlights is the need for a robust and strong the education policies and the legislative framework to enshrine those policies. And so that's why it was really critical for us to address this lack of a solid legislative framework now as a matter of priority, because we want to be able to, as I said, position the education system to continue to grow in its journey to strive for excellence. So over the past 2 years in particular, the work of the education team in the Ministry of Education and the Department of Education Services was not only geared towards the implementation of the strategic plan for education, which I've spoke about previously with regards to continuity in that regard, but it was also driven by the need to address the 6 policy priorities which we established shortly upon taking office in 2013. And again, those 6 policy priority areas line up in a large degree with what the McKinsey report talks about in terms of taking education systems to greater heights. And just for a recap, for those of you that may not have heard the budget debate recently, the 6 policy priority areas which, as I said, myself as Minister, Councillor Connolly, and the government has adopted upon taking office was priority 1 being looking at increasing international competitiveness and raising standards. Priority Area 2 talks about focusing on special education needs and persons with disabilities. Priority Area 3 deals with looking at conflict resolution and crime reduction as being an important part of the education system. Priority Area 4 looks at technical and vocational education and training. Priority Area 5 has to do with improving information, communication, and technology, and science, technology, engineering, and mathematics provision in the schools. And finally, Priority Area 6 looks at strengthening the public-private partnerships in education and training. And again, I encourage you all to listen to the debate to get a more comprehensive overview as to what the initiatives of the ministry that took place over the past 2 years in order to address each of those priority areas in turn. So the Education Bill 2015 speaks to and addresses most of these 6 priority areas, which, as I said, this coalition government has established upon taking office. And it's also important to note that, the bill pretty much codifies what is already in practice or in policy with respect to what's happening in our education system. It, as I said, it provides the actual foundation to be able to make the kinds of requirements and regulations that we are now, as I said, putting in law as opposed to just leaving them as a policy adopted by the ministry or the government. And so if we turn specifically to the law itself or the bill itself, now given that the bill is over 30 pages long and has 16 parts and over 40 clauses, I'm not proposing to go through line by line or clause by clause to discuss the bill, but I will highlight a few of the key aspects which are covered in the bill. Nonetheless, I do encourage you all to get a copy of the bill, download it from the ministry's website. It's up on the website, and to have a look at it. And of course, members of the public are encouraged to complete the survey. There's a survey that's attached as well to give your feedback during this public consultation period as well. We want to hear from you. And as I said, we will be having targeted stakeholder meetings, which the acting chief officer will tell us about a bit more about when he does his wrap up. So looking at part 2 of the bill, part 2 of the bill talks about kind of creating the lines of accountability, and it talks about the duties of the Minister of Education, which includes establishing policy and the strategic direction for education, as well as the responsibilities of other governmental entities, the chief officer and the Education Council. So again, it does create that and codify that sense of accountability and responsibility for the education system in law, which we felt was important. So we know exactly who is responsible for what and the lines of authority, and therefore you can increase accountability in the system as a result as well. It also specifically contemplates and acknowledges partnerships with the private sector and other organizations in the provision of educational institutions and programs. And so, again, it does capture our goal to create greater opportunities for public-private partnerships in education and training. And, as I've spoken to time and time again, increasing these partnerships with the private sector is a key plank of this government administration. And we've already seen some very highly successful partnerships and outcomes as a result. We have with Life organization with respect to the literacy interventions. We've got partnerships with CISPA for numeracy interventions. And we also have partnerships with Hedge Funds Care with respect to child abuse prevention interventions in the schools as well, to name a few. And so the proposed legislation formally recognizes the desire and the goals to increase these kinds of collaborations in public education. Part 3 of the bill outlines the requirement to register all non-government educational institutions, so private schools and the like. And it provides a regulatory framework which governs such registration. And I think at this point it's important to say that the bill is the framework legislation. The bill will be accompanied by very detailed regulations to support each part of the bill. And those regulations are actually, as I said, going to be based on either policies that are currently in effect or policies that are soon to be adopted in order to provide the meat and bones, so to speak, as to how the law will work in operation. And so the regulations themselves aren't attached as a part of this bill, but they will be forthcoming at the same time once the bill is brought forward to the Legislative Assembly for adoption. So again, Part 3 talks about the need to register all educational institutions and the framework which governs that regime. Undoubtedly, and you hear it in conversations around the water cooler, nationally, on the radio and otherwise, the participation and the responsibility of parents and guardians in their child's educational journey is of utmost paramount importance. And so Part 4 of the bill actually looks at and sets out a duty of a parent or a legal guardian of a child of compulsory school age to ensure that the child receives a full-time education suitable to the child's requirements, which means either attending a school or providing for homeschooling. So again, that was an important aspect that we, needed to bring forward in this legislation, is the role that parents and guardians play with respect to ensuring that their child is in school, in some form of school that is suitable and acceptable to the national standards. And Part 4 of the bill speaks specifically to the ability to homeschool, which again was never and is not currently reflected in the legislation. And so it does provide a framework which will allow parents to opt for homeschooling, but again, it will be regulated according to the regulations that will support this section of the bill. Part 5 of the bill also establishes such things as the national curriculum and national qualifications framework within the law, moving it from just beyond policy. And it should be noted that the current law, there is no provision for a national curriculum beyond the requirements to teach religious education in school. And, the current bill also contemplates the minister's ability to require all schools, that includes public and private schools, to introduce studies relating to history and the culture of the Cayman Islands. And so that, again, was an important aspect that we felt was lacking in our current system. We are obviously very proud of who we are as a country and where we come from and where we're going, and it's important that our people and our children in particular also learn that appreciation. And so to have that enshrined in law as an option, it's going to be a requirement for government schools, and it is a requirement as a part of the national curriculum now. But that option is also there for to be able to have that requirement of private schools. And of course, conversations would need to be had in order to how we would affect that. But again, it's a way to enshrine in law that we are proud of our history, we're proud of our culture, and it's a way that we want to be able to ensure that our children actually learn an appreciation as well as to what that is. Part 6 and 11 of the bill also talks about the critical area as it relates to, Part 6 as it relates to a robust quality assurance regime for education, and Part 11 dealing with early childhood education, care and education. And so again, in keeping with government's mandate and focus on increasing international competitiveness and raising standards in education, the bill calls for the establishment of an Office of Education Quality Assurance, and it regulates the provisions as it relates to early childhood care and education centres. And so, again, with respect to the early childhood care and education centres, the bill and accompanying regulations will reflect the current policy, and we've had, an extensive conversations about where we've come and what we're doing in that area as well. So the bill will actually codify the practice, the good practice that has been adopted with respect to the guidelines, the national guidelines, and also the curriculum, the early childhood curriculum, etc. With respect to the Office of Education Quality Assurance, Part 6 establishes, again, the need to have a rigorous, objective, and independent schools inspections regime for both government schools, private schools, and early childhood education centres as well. And so the office will be responsible for reporting on the quality and effectiveness of the provision and practice of the schools in, as I said, that spectrum, and will also provide information to myself as minister and to the government on matters related to education policy and support in order to address whatever issues that the inspection, the quality assurance regime has found. And so, I think, again, it's important to remind the public that in absence of having such a functioning and robust Office of Education Quality Assurance, we, as a government and as a ministry, commissioned the first ever baseline schools inspections, which has taken place over the current academic year. And that was to give us, again, that line in the sand as to say, where are we now with respect to education provision in each of our schools? And that includes Cayman Islands Further Education Centre and the Lighthouse schools, the specialist schools, so to speak. And so the objectives really of that baseline schools inspections were twofold, which was to provide myself as minister and the government as a whole an independent view and assessment of the education system with respect to, as I said, each school. And because, inspections haven't taken place in such a long time, we felt it was necessary to establish that kind of baseline understanding now, and then help us to get a better picture as to what needs to happen to move forward towards achieving a Centre of Education Excellence, which we all strive for. And the second goal really is to attempt to try to restore confidence in some instances in the system, to validate where there's good practice carried out, to validate that practice, to basically highlight that good practice, but also where there are areas of weaknesses or areas where there needs to be significant improvement, to also bring that to the attention of the government as well, and with the specific expectation that, evidence-based recommendations would be forthcoming in order to address some of those issues. And so, I anticipate that those inspection reports would be available by the end of this academic year and into the summer. And so we look forward to receiving them and, as I said, taking action accordingly. So the issue of looking at our system and in creating a regime going forward that ensures that we have timely reviews just to take the temperature of where we're at and are we moving in the direction we want to be moving in is now embedded or is proposed to be embedded in the law. So there isn't any surprises or there isn't situations where there would be lapse in such a regime. And as I said, it's, with respect to this year, we started obviously with the government schools, but the quality assurance aspect will be extended to all institutions that are registered in the country in that regard, schools and early childhood centres. Again, in the same way that the current law that's in force doesn't make any provisions explicitly for special education needs, the bill establishes in law provisions to address the needs of our children with special education needs and disabilities. And so Part 13 in particular calls for the publication of a special education needs code of practice. Code of practice, which regulates the process by which special education needs students are identified and the interventions which may be needed in order to address those needs. And so, again, the bill reflects the policy priority of this government with respect to addressing the needs of some of our most vulnerable students in the system. Part 7 of the bill addresses the issue of professional standards in education. And it requires, for the first time, that all teachers will be licensed. And so not just private school teachers, but all teachers teaching in the public school system as well, will be licensed formally through this regime. And again, this is as a part of our ongoing commitment to ensuring that standards are in place, that are established, and of course the ultimate goal would be to continue to raise standards in education. And so that there's a proposal for a council of professional standards in education to be established, and it is actually envisaged to be either a subcommittee of the Education Council, which would specifically be looking at professional standards as a part of their remit and mandate as well. And but again, in absence of having a formal professional standards enshrined in law, the ministry did do a tremendous amount of work over the past 2 years, and in particular this past academic year, with respect to adopting and making a professional development formally a policy of the ministry that needs to be adhered to it, well, especially as it relates to public school teachers. So there was a formal adoption of the professional development policy, and this again is in line with going back to the kind of taking the international scope, is in line with the McKinsey report's findings about improving teaching quality, and that teaching quality often is seen as one of the most, if not the most, critical factor impacting student performance. So by formally adopting a professional development policy, which makes it a requirement for teachers to continually upgrade their skills and keep up with current best practices, is a way to ensure that they are also improving themselves year on year as educators. Because if we want our children to be lifelong learners, we need to lead by example in that regard. And of course, teachers must also be prepared to walk in those shoes as well. And so that really was why we felt it was critical to formally adopt professional development as a policy requirement going forward. For many years, the schools have been calling for greater clarity as it relates to the management and discipline of students. And the law, in keeping with the international obligations that Councillor Connolly spoke about very briefly, does ban corporal punishment in the schools. However, Part 12 does provide comprehensive provisions as it relates to disciplinary penalties to support teachers in dealing with disruptive behaviors in class, and it creates clear protocols for reasonable use of force and safe handling of children. And that, again, will be supported by detailed regulations to support that aspect of the bill itself. And so with the passing, the anticipated passing of the law, the ministry and the department will be able to enable certain training with respect to safe handling of children moving ahead. Again, this is in line with the work that is currently underway with regard to positive interventions and the Safer Schools initiative that the ministry and department and schools are currently carrying out. The bill also recognizes that there are occasional threats to health and safety of students and staff with persons that are not associated with the schools entering school premises. And so Part 16 specifically provides a legal right to prosecute persons causing a nuisance on the school or premises or creating these types of unsafe environments or disruptions, and the ability to restrict them from gaining future access if necessary. Again, this was an important aspect of the law in order to try to create that sense of safety, both for students, staff, and persons when they're actually on school premises. Part 16 of the bill makes it a requirement for schools, for all schools, and for all early childhood care and education centres to have a child protection policy that is in compliance with the Children's Law, the 2012 revision that's currently in force. Again, this is an important aspect, and you would have recalled, my statement in particular as it relates to abuse of children And it's absolutely critical that the education law does make it a requirement that schools take their responsibilities serious when it comes to identifying and taking appropriate action as it results to protecting our children. And so therefore the law specifically requires a child protection policy and a regime to be adopted and implemented by all schools and early childhood care centres. Part 9 of the bill deals specifically with the issues of technical and vocational education and training in the schools, and also Part 10 deals with the area of post-compulsory education and training institutions, commonly known as tertiary education, but we've broadened it, the definition to include, again, technical and vocational training and exploits that go beyond the compulsory school age provisions. So that, again, the law does enshrine what is a policy priority of this government, which is to look at ensuring that we have sufficient provision with respect to the provision of technical and vocational education and training. So in a nutshell, that is what the broad parameters of the law addresses and some of the key areas that we felt that needed to be supported in law as soon as possible in order for us to, as I said, take our system to the next level. And the bill really does represent a milestone for this country. And as Councillor referred to, it used the modernization law as a basis, as a framework, but it does significantly enhance, in many instances, the scope of the law while clarifying some areas that may have been there with respect to ambiguity, and that may have been the cause for concern as to why the bill was never taken forward in the first place. Again, it's been a long time coming, and it represents an enormous amount of work by many people involved. And so I want to publicly thank everybody who has played your role and your part in getting us to this point. And look forward to hearing from the public in this regard with respect to any other concerns that they think that they may want to address, or just basically views in general. And as I said, there is a survey that will allow you to be able to have your say, so to speak. And the expectation and the hope is once the law is passed, we will be able to provide that legislative framework and platform to be able to create the Education Center of Excellence. Because there's no question our education system has to be able to compete with the best, because our people have to be able to compete with the best with respect to jobs, with respect to employment opportunities and career opportunities. And so our education system must have a foundation which helps to prepare our students to take advantage, as I said, of the employment and entrepreneurial opportunities that exist in order for them to excel in the local economy and to compete in the global economy. So with that, I want to say thank you for your attention, and I now turn it over to Acting Chief Officer Suku to tell us a bit more about the public consultation phase.
Thank you, Minister. As Minister alluded to earlier, we are currently underway with public consultation. We've had meetings so far with various stakeholder groups, and we've arranged sessions with teachers, with specialist staff, principals, with the Education Council of the Cayman Islands. We'll be moving forward with further public consultation with PTAs and with students. We have a teacher forum that we'll be meeting with shortly to go through the bill with them. We will also be arranging a student forum because of all the stakeholders. Obviously, these are the primary stakeholders in this process, and we need to make sure that they're involved as much as possible. There will be opportunities for direct consultation with schools. We will be going to Cayman Brac and Little Cayman as well to have consultation with that district. And we're hoping that public consultation period will be closed on June the 30th. That is what we're planning towards. And so far we are on target for consultation to take place throughout the month of June, ending on June the 30th, with preparations being made to have the bill to the Legislative Assembly by the September setting. I'd like to announce also the Minister alluded to the law and the survey. The bill and our survey, which is done under the SurveyMonkey format, will be on the Ministry's website later today. That's they're on the website now, www.education.gov.ky. and I'd like to encourage the public to take a look and provide feedback to us on it. This is a consultative process. We want to make sure that the people of the country have an opportunity to review the bill and to take part in the process. That being said, we have a few minutes for questions, and we'll take questions from the media and close.
Morning, everybody. It's Wendy from Cayman News Service. I've got the mic. I've got a couple of questions, so I don't know whether you want me to do all the lot or let everybody else have a go and then come back. What do you prefer? Okay, they're not that difficult. One of the reasons that we'd heard in the past when the UDP chose not to implement that law, if I remember rightly, the minister at the time spoke about there were problems in the law relating to truancy and discipline that he was uncomfortable with. And I just wondered whether you could actually give us a bit more detail about what's covered, and also the issues of what happens to kids that are expelled or suspended, and where education provision for them comes and things like that. So I know that was a particular issue. The other questions are, does the law provide for the privatisation of government schools? And do private schools, I didn't quite hear what you said, do private schools have to teach the national curriculum or just history and culture?
Okay, I'll start with your last question first and then work my way up, so to speak. No, the national curriculum will be required of public schools. The law allows the minister and the minister, it says, to make it a requirement for all schools to incorporate history and culture of the Cayman Islands. It doesn't actually make it a positive obligation at this time for all schools, but it does allow that provision to be in place. And we thought it was important to put that in from the get-go to kind of basically signal to the country the fact that, obviously, in particular, I can speak for this government administration, we feel that it's important to have a regime where, no matter where you go to school, if you choose to go to school, homeschool, if you choose to go private schools, if you choose to go public schools, that students are exposed and get a good appreciation and understanding of who we are as a people, who we are as a country. And so the enabling, the part of that law enables the ministers to make that a requirement. So currently it is a requirement, or it would be, it would be a requirement once the national curriculum is adopted as a part of the legislation for public schools to offer that. But the law does allow that provision to be made as a requirement for private schools. And obviously these, conversations and discussions would have to be had with the schools themselves or with the Private Schools Association as to how we can best implement such a curriculum. But again, it's to enshrine the importance of teaching and inculcating our history and our culture as a people to all students in the Cayman Islands, irrespective of where they go to school. The second question, your second question was to do, sorry, Wendy, with the second question was, does the law provide for privatization? The law provides for partnerships with respect to provision of services, with respect to governance, but it doesn't speak to the issue of privatization. And then your last
Truancy and discipline, is that addressed in the law? And what provision is there in the law, if there is, for kids that are either expelled or suspended from school, and what educational provision is provided for them? Is that all in the law?
Well, again, this is where I said that the law is a framework law. What really should have happened during the last administration, in my view, is that the law itself, the bill itself, provides the overarching policy guidelines. What then needs to happen are the regulations to support each of those guidelines. And so that is where those details would be captured. So currently the bill wouldn't speak to the details or the specifics as it relates to students that you're describing, but that would be captured with respect to regulations. So that is how we would address that issue, and that's how the framework law was always envisioned in my mind with respect to, and again, wearing my lawyer's hat now, that's really how the regulations would be supporting the actual law itself by giving the meat and potatoes of how the actual regime would work.
Hi, can I just ask what happened to the KPMG report that was being done on the school system that was going to speak to these public-private partnerships that are addressed in the law. I mean, we had a press conference here, I
Yes,
want
you
to say
did.
6
And-
months ago, and
I don't remember. Well, we did,
maybe not
we
that
did.
long, but
Yeah.
the indication then was that it would be publicly released by now.
Well, no, I think the indication was that so the two reviews are happening in tandem. The release of the reports are going to happen in one fell swoop because we didn't want one to influence the other. So the reports will be with the reports are still forthcoming in that regard, but the reports will be working to complement what it is we're trying to do, which is to find out exactly where we're at from a system-wide review as well as the individual schools as well. So once those reports are have been presented to the ministry and reviewed by the ministry, those reports will be made publicly available.
You actually have the KPMG report
No,
now?
we have not.
It's not been finished yet?
No.
So you
We
don't know
haven't.
when
So,
those will be done?
so we're no, but like I said, the expectation is that it's going to be done by the end of the academic year, and that was what that's what I'm anticipating, and that's what I'm looking forward to, and that's what we're working towards in terms of making sure that we get it in a time to be able to address some of the concerns that they may highlight. Now, as I said, the ministry hasn't been sitting back waiting on those reports to take action. There's been a lot of information, a lot of work that's been done over the past year, in particular 2 years in total since taking office. And I mean, I'm happy to, if anybody wants a synopsis of the overview that I provided in the 2015-16 budget debate that really highlights some of the key things that we've been doing to address issues that are known to the ministry, that are known to the department, to try to tackle some of the areas of concern. But now having these independent inspections, independent reports will help, again, to help us to decide, well, where have we not anticipated, so to speak? Where do we need to put extra emphasis? At least that's the expectation that I'm having. And so I'm looking forward to receiving those reports.
The thing with the KPMG report, I was just wondering, because depending on what that says, you may require further legislative changes, right?
Well, no, the legislation is robust enough that it allows for, as I said, partnerships, whatever that, it allows for, many different, there's government schools, there are assisted schools, and then there are independent schools. And so that framework, and then there's home schools. So the education system is quite robust the education bill is quite robust in terms of the types of schools that it allows. But again, regulations is really going to be the key. So the framework allows for a number of different types of schools in the country, depending on where the focus is, depending on the policies adopted, depending on the strategic direction taken. Then that would be supported by the development of regulations and in that regard.
There's enough flexibility in it to allow for charter schools, for example, if that was the direction that you went down.
Well, again, that's something that we would need to look at in terms of how the regulations would be drafted in that regard. But the legislation allows for partnerships in education and partnerships at the governance level as well. But there isn't any specific call for any one type of partnership.
And would that have been possible under the previous law anyway, or no?
No, not as far as I understand the way the law is drafted, no.
Okay, thanks.
Mona Lisa Tatum, Cayman 27. You spoke about disciplinary action for children who are disruptive. The bill obviously has a section that covers that area. And then you also spoke about continuing development of teachers. When it comes to disciplinary action, there are and have been said that there are some children who may have ADHD, ADD, or dyslexia that may become disruptive because of their learning ability. Is this being addressed specifically? I'm not sure if this is too far out, but is this something that's being addressed specifically when it comes to the teachers? Each teacher in those classes that will now have to be licensed, will they have to be able to, or are they already taught to look out for these types of things so as to address that type of disruption?
Well, Mona, that's a great question. I think that the view and the approach that I certainly take as minister and the government takes with respect to addressing issues is to try to find synergies between the strategies that we employ. So one key strategy was professional development. We needed to ensure that it wasn't just something that was seen as a add-on or something that was neither here nor there. So we adopted formally a professional development policy, making it a requirement for teachers and educators to continue that. Coupled with that, we've actually provided, and we will continue to provide, specialist training with respect to, regarding issues of identification and what would be appropriate interventions at the different levels by the different professionals as it relates to special education needs. You would all recall that there was a professional development conference which was held in February of this year, and the keynote speaker and also the main focus was dealing with issues as it relates to inclusion, as it relates to special education needs, etc. So, and that was, on a national scale. We also have identified, going forward for the 2015-2016 year, it was important to have at each of the primary schools, in particular, a role of a SENCO, a special education needs coordinator, which up until at this point, that role was not clearly defined, the responsibility is not clearly defined, and even the training to support that role was not there in place. And so going forward, each primary school will have, and Grand Cayman will have a non-teaching SENCO. And so, again, that is a real milestone because it does signal to the country and it signals to the parents and students themselves that for any student that may have these special learning needs, that there will be a mechanism to help identify, but not just identify. I think the system is actually very good at identifying. The problem is the implementation of interventions. And so the expectation is that, going forward, we will be developing a system that does a better job at once these issues are identified, how are they actually going to be addressed in our system? And so the legislation supports that type of move to addressing the issues as it relates to those students.
I have another question, maybe slightly off topic. I'm just concerned about the fact that A-level students from the BRAC have to actually come down to Grand Cayman to take their exams here. Would there be any provision or any type of change or regulation that would no longer have to happen as to separate children from their families at that age?
I mean, that's a difficult issue on many levels. I mean, the law does talk about, recognizing the unique circumstances of Cayman BRAC, and it allows for, certain types of programs, so to speak, that may be just developed based on the needs in the BRAC themselves. The issue of A-levels, obviously, it's a complicated one because there's a cost benefit of, the number of students versus the cost of actually providing it. And so, I mean, to say that is going to be the case, I'm certainly not in a position to say that because, A, it would require a commitment of resources that I would have to get buy-in from the rest of, the government in that regard. But also, we certainly need to look at what the provisions are with respect to students in the BRAC and making sure that students in the BRAC needs are being met as well as students here in Grand Cayman.
And we'll wrap it up here. Again, I'd like to reiterate that the draft bill and our SurveyMonkey survey are both on the Ministry of Education website. It's www.education.gov.ky. We'd like to encourage the public to take a read and to provide feedback to it. That concludes our press conference. I'd like to thank everyone here and the listening and watching public. Have a good day.